I want to talk to you about what socioeconomic class is, and we can refer to this as SES, socioeconomic class, or you'll hear me just refer to it as class. You might also hear me refer to it as social class. When we talk about SES, we're talking about an individual's economic status, and that status is based on a couple of factors. I think the misconception in lay society is that it's based just on your income, meaning what you earn, but it's also based on your wealth. And there's an important distinction between income and wealth, because income is what you earn and wealth is what you have. If you have a car, for example, that would be considered wealth, assuming it's paid off. Okay, so if you're in debt and you don't own the car outright, that's debt, not wealth. A large portion of your income is going towards paying off that debt, whereas somebody who owns it, their income can go towards other things. It could be stocks, bonds, savings accounts, property, including things like art, expensive jewelry, any sort of collectible, but also land, housing, commercial buildings. These are things that you own that if you needed money, you could sell them, liquidate them, and get cash. Income is what you earn. So income is like the paycheck you receive at your job. But income can also be the money you make off of your wealth. So if I have stocks in Zoom, for example, I've made quite a bit of income off those stocks since March of 2020, because Zoom stock has gone up an incredible amount. That has created more income for me that I can then either spend or I can reinvest in more wealth. So those two things aren't completely unrelated, but there is a very clear distinction that's important because most of us have access to income. Very few of us have access to wealth. Socioeconomic class status also is based on the type of work or occupation that you have and then the educational level that you have. And we want to consider all of these things because there's a lot of interaction here between these variables. So if you think about somebody like me, my position, my occupation as a professor is very much an upper middle class position. My education level is a PhD, which is usually considered an upper middle class or an upper class degree. But if you look at my wealth and income, I am very much lower middle class. Professors, especially adjunct professors, don't make that much. And because we don't make that much, we have no wealth. I'm actually debt poor. So my paychecks, a very large portion of my income goes towards paying down debt. And I have more debt than I make in a year. You want to consider all these factors because if you only choose one, you might put somebody in a different class category than what they really would if you consider kind of across these different variables. And one of the problems with even trying to figure out where we land on the class hierarchy is that nobody wants to talk about class and nobody wants to talk honestly about class. It's referred to as the great taboo in society. If you ask somebody, hey, what class are you? Overwhelmingly, people are going to answer middle class. Not because they actually are middle class, but because they fear judgment of being upper class and they fear judgment of being lower class. Nobody in lower class wants to acknowledge, or very few people in lower class want to acknowledge their lower status in society. And very wealthy people don't want to acknowledge their very high status because they want to blend in with the Joneses, right? They want to be seen as just like everybody else, and they don't want to be accused of being greedy or accused of not understanding the rest of society, right? They get very defensive about that. So if we can't talk about it, we can't talk about it honestly, that means it's very difficult to address things like class inequality and how to solve those problems in society. And then you also want to think about how social class is not only an ascribed status, but it's also an achieved status. So we're each born into a class category, and those aren't necessarily always going to be the same statuses, although they often are. We find that in the United States, it's actually very difficult to achieve upward mobility, so it's highly likely that the class you're born into is going to be the class that you maintain throughout your lifetime. There's this huge misconception, if you look at something like the caste system in India, of like, wow, those people, that's the ethnocentrism, right? Those people are like really disadvantaged because if they're born poor, they'll always be poor, without recognizing that that's exactly what's happening here in the US. We just don't have the official caste system. We pride ourselves on the free market and capitalism, but really it creates a very similar dynamic in terms of class inequality.